All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our live stream session on moving to a privacy-centric cookieless world. We're really happy to be joining you today to be discussing a challenge that organizations are going to be facing over the next 12 to 18 months as the typical way that we've been doing business is going to be changing and adjusting as we go. So for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet or to work with before, because I see that we do have a number of new individuals joining with us, welcome to our live stream session. My name is Lyle Wedge. I am an associate professor of marketing at Memorial University in St. John's, Newfoundland, as well as the developer, director, and designer of the Digital Academy, what was previously the Digital and Social Media Program. Now, one of the things that's going to be key in today's session is that if you do have any questions at all during the live stream, we do want to make sure that we allow time to be able to address any questions that you've got. Please just type them into the comment section on the video, and I will see those come up and we will respond to them when we've got a break in the sessions to make sure that we get everything addressed. So maybe if somebody just wants to type in and let me know that you're hearing me okay and that all the tech seems to be working and we got a good broadcast going on, then that would be awesome, because then I can see that that things are connected in. One of the things that is really important as we start to sort of come to an understanding about operating in a cookieless world is, first of all, we got to really have a grasp on what is a cookie, why are we getting rid of them, and some of the terminology that is going to be important for us to come to grips with. Well, first of all, at its very fundamental level, cookies are designed to be able to save a visitor's information coming in and to track any conversion events, anything that they're doing on the site, and connecting it to other data points. This has really been for two key purposes. Number one is for being able to provide better service. Think about your banking websites. It would be an absolute pain when you go to your banking website to have to dig out your bank card and type in the number every single time you want to go and use the banking website. But through the use of cookies, they're able to save that information, recognize you when you're coming back, and say, hey, guess what? We know that you were here. Here's your information. For security purposes, we've seen these moved into a two-factor authentication, where to make doubly sure it's you, once it sort of verifies, it's like, we're going to send you a text message to your phone number. What's your secret code? So that we can make sure that it's not somebody who has borrowed your computer or your device or wherever things go. Now, these cookies are typically placed or installed on websites through the use of a pixel. A pixel is a code that you place on a website by either a tool or a site that allows cookies to then be placed on the visitor's devices. So the pixel itself does not have the details, but the cookies are embedded into there, and it's what transmits the code. A session ID records the user's information for a single visit. And these are never an issue. There's never a challenge with these. There's never a hiccup, because it's not sharing or transmitting other information. Now, there's two main types of cookies that we need to be aware of. And they're not the real good ones like chocolate chip or oatmeal raisin or whatever. It's dealing with first-party cookies and third-party cookies. Now, first-party cookies are those that are created and owned by you and your platform. The best way to think about this would be tracking cookies that are put on your website. So when somebody visits your website, once they log in, if you've got a login section, think of your banking situation again, then that cookie shares information with you and that website. So it's called a first-party cookie because the data is staying on the platform. This is also not a huge issue because we're opting in to use that information. We're opting in to use that site. The problem comes in, and why we've seen all sorts of legislation and actions being taken, is when we talk about third-party cookies. Third-party cookies are those that are created and owned by other tools and platforms. Think about the Facebook cookies that you install, or your LinkedIn cookies that are there that help provide you with information as things that are going on other channels. So from a Facebook example, if you have the Facebook cookie, you can then see a lot more information about, oh, did somebody who interacted with this specific video on your Facebook page then go to your website? And as they went to your website, what did they do? Where did they travel around? What did they buy? So this is the part that becomes challenging, because through the installation of third-party cookies onto a platform, the concern is that users may not realize all the different people that are gaining access to the data that they're sharing. It's not data that's being used on that one website. It's data that is then going out to others. And this is where a lot of the concern is happening and a lot of the changes that we've got to address. Legally, there's three big sort of legislations that are talked about that impact things. Canada, we see PIPEDA, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, that really addresses a need that when we're collecting what is identified as personally identifiable information, we need to disclose to the users what we're collecting, why we're collecting it, how long we're going to retain it for, who has access to that data. And it's not saying that we can't collect and retain that data, but we have to be clear and transparent about it. We have to let them know why we're doing that. Now, PIPEDA is really dealing with things from the standpoint of a private organization, a private company. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, is the one that deals within the EU, or the European Union, since 2018. The key is this is not just businesses in the EU. This is any business anywhere in the world that interacts with a member of the EU. So if anybody from the European Union visits your website, then you need to be making sure that you're following the policies of the GDPR. Fortunately, most of the PIPEDA policies are compliant within the GDPR. So if you're really making sure you're doing well on PIPEDA, you're going to be okay with the GDPR. The key thing is it requires organizations to identify all the personal data that they handle, and it is about full transparency about their practices. And this is the word that you're going to be seeing again and again and again. It's about the transparency. It's about how do we go about presenting that. And the other big piece, besides the transparency and the disclosure, is granting control to users over their information and how it's used. So putting the control and the decision as far as, do I want you to do this to my data, in the hands of the end user. The other one that is the more sort of the new kid on the block, if you will, is the CCPA. And this is really the only one from a US perspective that has come into play, and that is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which gives Californians the right to autonomy over the data that they generate. There's no overarching policies such as PIPEDA or the GDPR for Americans in general. So this just sort of lays some of the groundwork about what's going on. The other part that is impacting all these changes is user perceptions. 4 in 10 users don't trust brands to use their data responsibly. The number of data breaches that have occurred within organizations doesn't go a long way to help sort of providing confidence in this. And when we combine this with the fact that 86% of individuals are saying that data privacy is increasingly important, this comes from a report from KPMG earlier this year, we see that we've got legal legislation happening on one part, we've got users being more concerned on the other part, and we've got changes that are happening to all of our browsers and all the ways we connect with things, which really means that as an organization or a business, we've got to think a lot more about how we're collecting data, what we're collecting, and how we're going to go about using it. So as we mentioned, it is about transparency and the ongoing conversation that we have with customers, users, clients, those whose data that we have, rather than observing, or let's face it, it's not really observing, it's snooping on the customer, trying to track where they go, what they do, how do we know what's going on about them? At the end of the day, it's really about, why don't you just ask them? Rather than trying to hire a private investigator to track them as they browse all around the internet, why don't we have a conversation with our users, ask them what they're looking for, and provide them with that? So this is the part where these changes that are happening are sometimes presented as, oh my God, there's all these dramatic changes that are happening, this is going to be bad. It could actually and should actually be a major benefit for organizations, because if you do things the right way, your costs of advertising, your cost per conversion are all going to go down. Your relationships with users, the trust with users is going to go up. There's a lot of advantages in doing things the right way. Because at the end of the day, as this report from PricewaterhouseCoopers suggested, 84% of customers will take their business elsewhere if they don't trust how you're handling their data. Now, if you're not conversing them about this, if you're not having this conversation, how do they have ability to trust? So we have to sort of start thinking more about communicating with our clients, not just tracking them. And at the end of the day, it's about that informed consent. We've seen transitions that have started to happen as we're browsing around websites with the cookie bar, and we see all sorts of different options, either the bar across the bottom, the site collects cookies, this is how we're going to use it, do you agree? And it's sort of like, I agree or no, typically sends up the options. But we're seeing some interesting changes in how people perceive these cookie bars and perceive these transitions. And a lot of this is being driven by the browsers. If we look at the 3 main browsers that are out there, Firefox, which is used by about 4% of internet users globally, has started to block third-party cookies by default in 2019. So with all of these, you were able to override the settings, you were able to make changes and adjustments, but by default, any third-party cookies were blocked since 2019. Safari, which is used by 23% of internet users, has blocked all third-party cookies by default in 2020. This was an expansion on a move that they made as early as back in 2017, which was their Intelligent Tracking Prevention, or ITP, which was designed to limit the third-party cookie data that was being shared. In 2020, they went cold turkey and said, it's all done, no more third-party cookies. So the big reason why this is becoming a hot topic now, when 30% of your users were not providing third-party tracking data anyway, A lot of organizations didn't realize that. So anybody that came to your website that had a Facebook pixel, if they were using Safari, you didn't get the data on that. You had no idea that that was happening because that was already being blocked by the browser unless the user enabled it, which was highly unlikely. Why this is becoming a super hot topic now is because Chrome is the big monster in the browser world. It's used by 62% of internet users. They're going to stop using third-party cookies in 2023, which is a little over a year away, which may seem like a long time, but as we're going to talk about, you've got some work to do, which means we really need to get started preparing for this now. There's also some buzz that we're hearing with Apple's new presentation or new WDC conference next week, that there may be a new browser coming out for iOS, which will only sort of amplify these safety protocols, because that's always been a big thing that Apple's being moving on. And we see that with a lot of their ads right now. It's all about how do you stop people from tracking you? How do you turn all these tracking things off on your mobile devices? And they've really creatively gone with a new icon with the Apple logo to make it look like a padlock, because this is Apple's new mantra, and we see it on all the TV commercials. We see it on all their marketing strategy. But here's the weird thing. TikTok has just enabled first and third-party cookies within its pixel, both in standard and developer modes, just about 2 weeks ago. So why, if we're getting rid of third-party cookies, is TikTok moving and bringing in cookies now? Well, one of the big things about that is it's a year away. TikTok is starting to have some amazing returns on their advertising. And so this is really going to allow users who are dealing with advertising on TikTok to have some pretty significant data on how effective TikTok advertising is versus their advertising on other platforms. But this pixel that TikTok is releasing also enables first-party cookies, which are not going to be going away, and they will sort of be dealing with things internally. The reality that we're seeing about things, particularly those cookie bars that are showing up on websites, is most consumers just don't care. They are simply going to accept first-party cookies because it's easier and quicker to do so rather than go in and see all their settings and adjust everything. How many of you, sort of typically accept the cookies as you're browsing around the website? Because that's where it really comes down to when you think about, are you the one that's no cookies, no cookies, no cookies, or yeah, just whatever, I want to get rid of this bar, I'm just going to accept and move on. And it is a little bit based on device, because what we're seeing is on a desktop, many users are actually fine with cookies. They're like, oh, I'm on my desktop, it's fine, simply because there's less tracking of you and where you are. With a mobile device, there's a GPS, you're always carrying it with you. You're not carrying your desktop with you. So when we move into a mobile device setup, people start to become a little bit more concerned about the tracking side and where things go. Now, one of the things that's a little bit creative, and this is a part that comes in, is some new languages are starting to appear. And this is where it comes down to the old language was either decline or accept, one or the other. What we're seeing now is some people, and we'll avoid the ethical conversation about this for a moment, will use the term accept or manage preferences. By going to this direction, if you've got a choice to either accept or to go in and do more work to manage your preferences, a lot of people will just take the easy path out and go, I'm just going to accept. It's easier that way. But at the end of the day, is that really addressing the trust and transparency that people are looking at? And Diana has made a comment that she only accepts functional and performance cookies, not marketing related cookies. And that is becoming a key part. A lot of people are not accepting the marketing ones because they don't necessarily see them as providing relevant offers. The marketing that we've been doing with cookies has not been good, and it really hasn't been targeted and addressing what people want. So while the accept or manage preferences might be an easier way to get people to accept, it doesn't necessarily address the trust and that conversation that we want to have with our clients. The bottom line, this comes from Patty Boyle, who's the CEO of a company called Distillery, without the I, is that the biggest challenge today is addressing the cookieless future and addressing it in a way that's not simply using alternate identifiers, but rather a void of any identifier consumer data. So we shouldn't be thinking about tracking individual X as they go through and do things. It's about understanding what type of group individual X belongs to, what individual X might be looking at without knowing it's coming from them. And that's the piece where we go. The good news is all of your core basic metrics are still accessible without cookies. Your page views, your video views, your leads, your opportunities, all of that. We're able to see what messaging is driving engagement, what actions are driving interactions. What we're not going to be able to do is to attribute an unknown prospect or an unknown user to a known user. So we're not going to be able to follow somebody from an anonymous cookie to a known email address to know, hey, this is Bill. This is Bill as they work their way through our site. We're going to be needing to understand customers' journey as a collective whole. We're going to need to understand how this all comes into play, but not the individual. Individual privacy needs to be protected. So we've talked about the first-party cookies, staying on the platform, really addressing that. Third-party cookies, well, those are the ones that get shared elsewhere. This is one of the reasons why those who may be a little bit more cynical about Google say, well, Google doesn't care about canceling out third-party cookies because Google can still collect first-party cookies and have that cross-platform tracking between your browser, Google Analytics, YouTube, because that's not being shared with other companies. That's just being kept within Google. So when we think about this, the first-party cookie options have started to appear only recently. Facebook added first-party cookie options late in 2019. So right around the time the changes were starting to happen in Firefox and Safari. And Facebook really struggled with providing good tracking capabilities from their advertising and good conversion details and capabilities. So when we deal with most or all of these platforms really relying on advertising dollars, it's about making sure that we can track it. TikTok just added those first-party options, as we mentioned, in May of 2022. So where we have to think about is we've really got to think about our in-platform attribution, not our cross-channel marketing, to give us an idea about how well a specific ad platform is working for us. The key thing is there's a lot of myths out there with regards to measurement, and Google has identified it quite clearly. Getting rid of cookies will not disrupt your website tag. So it is not going to stop you from tracking those conversions on your website. It's not going to stop you from having that first-party data. It will stop you from understanding how what's happening on Google and on your website is also happening through Facebook and as people come from other platforms, other tools, whether it's Pinterest, Facebook, Snapchat, LinkedIn, whatever. People believe that being able to measure accurately relies on third-party data. And in fact, it's probably the opposite of that, because a lot of individuals and organizations trusted third-party data extensively, but as we've seen, we haven't been getting any of it from Safari or Firefox anyway. So we're not really getting the full picture. And the other part that comes into play is to protect privacy is not exclusive of driving your business results. We can and need to do both. And that's really where, as organizations, we've got to move to, is really starting to think about how can we respect and trust the privacy of our users, but still be able to give them the information that's important. At the end of the day, it's about providing guidance to individuals, not following them and tracking them, guiding them to where they want to be or where they might want to be, and making sure that you're doing that effectively. Now, it's not just small organizations or mid-size. Fortune 500 marketers are needing to move down this direction. And what we're seeing is a big piece that's going to come into play, and that is artificial intelligence is going to become even more and more important in our marketing efforts, because AI is not looking at what a single individual did, but AI can look at large data sets and look for patterns that are occurring, patterns that are happening without needing to look at an individual user. And that's one of the reasons why Fortune 500 marketers, 75% of them, are putting a lot more emphasis on how are we going to utilize artificial intelligence in our marketing efforts? How are we going to bring those together? And so that's really where we think about that move, is AI, artificial intelligence, has really become a key mantra in marketing in 2022, and how we use it, how it drives our advertising campaigns, how it makes decisions about where and how we put ads that are going to perform best, really do come into play. But here's the kicker. AI is just a tool. It's got to be incorporated in. And that's where Google Analytics 4 or GA4 and Tableau are key next generation analytics tools. GA4 is a complete replacement from your regular Google Analytics or your Universal Analytics. It's not just an update, it's a complete rebuild from the ground up with completely different data and completely different processes. If you have not already incorporated GA4 as a property on your website, it is something you need to have done yesterday, because you've got a little bit less than 12 months now before all of your Universal Analytics data is gone. It's no longer going to be collecting. It's no longer going to exist. Universal Analytics is history. Google is sunsetting it, and you have to go to GA4. Google Analytics, the Universal Analytics, was not built to handle today's environment. It was not built to handle multi-device attribution. It was not built to handle the privacy needs and the privacy demands. GA4 is. GA4 incorporates AI, advanced artificial intelligence, to help make decisions, to look for patterns, to drive decisions. And that's where third-party tools like Tableau for analyzing your data, for looking through these patterns, also use extensive artificial intelligence. And these are really two key tools that are going to be necessary for organizations going forward. Google Tag Manager is evolving as well. Google Tag Manager incorporates what's called Google Consent Mode. Google Consent Mode has been released, and what it does is it takes a look, and whenever anybody clicks on an ad, it checks to see if the user has provided a consent, and if it does, then it goes through and all of your tags work, it collects the data, everything goes as normal. If it hasn't, then it doesn't collect the data. If the user converts, you get the conversion data, but you don't get the details from the ad cookies. So consent mode is a critical piece of Tag Manager that you need to enable within your tag manager deployment. And it's really providing you with the way to have those cookies in place and be 100% compliant with, did this person give consent or not? Everything is contained within that Tag Manager platform. So Tag Manager, which has been a no-brainer for organizations to have on their website for the last decade, for being able to put pixels and code and information on your website, now has become even more critical with the need to manage consent, to recognize who's given consent, who hasn't, and how that data is being shared. So consent mode in Tag Manager is a key piece. Now, we said that the biggest issue is because Chrome is 60% of all the browsing that's going on out there. So the timeline for where things are happening on this is coming up later this year in September and October. Google will announce its transition timeline and the actual date when it's going to retire third-party cookies. In November of 2022 through to April, Google's then going to provide insights and guidance for businesses on how to adjust to this new change. They'll start to publish their playbooks and other documentation to say, hey, this is how you've got to make changes and adjustment. There's going to be a massive education and training standpoint with regards to using Tag Manager on those controls. And then between May and August of 2023, Google will officially retire cookies in Chrome. All right, they're going to completely get rid of them. Third-party cookies will not be happening within Chrome anymore. So you're like, well, that's a year away. Why do we need to worry about it? Because when this happens, you want to be turnkey and have data being collected the right way and have things being matched up, because it's all about relationships. You need to make sure that you're communicating with your clients, with your guests, with your visitors, whoever's using your site. They need to know why you're needing access to the data. What's in it for them? How are they benefiting from that? Transparency and communication are really going to be about the keys that come into play. So, where are things going to go in the future? What are the couple of changes that are going to be happening coming up? Well, Google will be replacing cookies with new browser APIs such as trust tokens, which are coming out. So this is sort of where people are going to be able to say, I trust this website for this information. And in doing that, going through your Tag Manager, it will then allow that. So it's not necessarily that third-party cookies or tracking is going away, but the key is it's putting people in control and giving them the ability as far as whether they want to enable it and what organizations they want to have access with it. Apple still has IDFA, which is their identifier for advertisers, which users can opt into. But with all of the new options for turning tracking off, particularly on mobile devices on Apple, this is going to become less and less as an aspect. Facebook is working on something they're calling an aggregated event management, AEM, which is, again, a non-cookie based conversion tracking, where it's not identifying people at the individual level, but more dealing with aggregate level so you can see how effective things are going to be. And at the end of the day, we see a lot of platforms, whether it's Facebook or Messenger or LinkedIn, that have lead generation ads where your ad can drive people to input their data and say, I want you to contact me to talk to me about this. So those types of ads are going to become even more important because that lead generation is going to be their way of saying, I don't want you to surreptitiously follow me around, and just because I've been on your website, I don't want to see your damn product everywhere I browse around the internet. I want to talk to you about this product, and here's my data. So a lot more effective use of time, a lot more effective use of trust. And here's the thing. You need to start working on your new measurement framework now. How are you going to be tracking those metrics that you've determined are important for you? How are you going to realize whether those goals and objectives that you're trying to achieve are working without the use of cookies? What alternative mechanisms do you have? Why we want to do that now and why we want to have this all in place, debugged, turnkey, running data before, say, October to December of this year, is when we get rid of the cookies and next year when we're looking, okay, is this good or bad? We need to be able to look back on our year-on-year data. And if we don't have data collected without the cookies from 2022 to compare in 2023, we're not going to know whether it's good or bad because we have no benchmarks yet. This is why getting GA4 installed now is key. Getting it implemented now, putting your new measurement framework in place now, start running everything in parallel so that when we lose the old cookie data, we're going to be in a good position. So the 4 things that you need to really put down as your priorities with what you're doing is think about how you can do first-party data and offline conversion tracking. So thinking about where you're using third-party tracking and how can you replace that effectively with first-party tracking? How can you communicate that with your audiences and how can you deal with offline conversion tracking? There's tools and ways to be able to do that, but we've got to start thinking about that now and start planning for being in a situation where we have no third-party cookies. Enhanced conversions. Thinking about how we go about connecting those conversions through this first-party data. And as we mentioned, Tag Manager and Consent Mode are going to be key for bringing all of those pieces together and matching when we've got that consent and being able to connect it all. And finally, getting GA4, Google Analytics 4, running on your website ASAP as a property alongside your Universal Analytics so that you've got that parallel tracking right now for the next 12 months. And then once your Universal Analytics is gone, your GA4 has a year's worth of data, and we're seeing more and more of an increase in the artificial intelligence capability coming out with GA4 as we go. So a lot of things to think about, but there's a lot of confusion out there about, are cookies going to get rid of all of my marketing? No. Are we going to still be able to track and understand whether our digital ads are working? Yes. Do we have to do things differently? Absolutely. So that's where we wanted to go today, have a little bit of a conversation with you and just to sort of lay some of the foundations of what you need to think about with regards to migrating things through. What I'd like to do now is to open the floor up, and if anybody has any questions, please just type them into the comment section and we'll be able to take care of those and answer them as we go. If not, thanks very much for joining us. And if you do have any questions down the road that you don't think about or weren't able to type into the comment section, perhaps you're watching this through a recording and not in a live mode, please feel free to reach out to us on any of our platforms and we'll happily get back to you. Other than that, get there and start getting your GA4 installed on your website. That's step number 1, folks, to start to get yourself ready. Any questions, just feel free to type them in. Other than that, for those of you that don't have any questions, thanks for joining us and have yourself a wonderful day. All right, we're not seeing any questions popping up, so if anything pops up afterwards, I will respond in the comment section. Other than that, thanks very much, everybody. Have yourself a wonderful weekend, and got any questions, please let us know. Thank you.